The smell of antiseptic never really leaves you. Even on your days off, even when you're standing somewhere you have absolutely no business being. Like the private viewing room of Hargrove and Sons Funeral Home on a Tuesday afternoon in November, you can still catch it underneath everything else. Under the white roses and the eucalyptus wreaths and whatever expensive candles they'd lit along the windowsills. That sharp chemical undertone. I'd spent 4 years as a trauma nurse at Mercy General, and that smell had become part of me the way coffee becomes part of people who work night shifts. You stop noticing it until you're somewhere it shouldn't be, and then it stops you cold. I wasn't supposed to be there. I want to make that clear right now, because nothing that happened next makes any sense unless you understand that I had made a wrong turn. Literally. I was supposed to be delivering a casserole dish to Mrs. Holloway on Birchwood Lane. She'd just lost her husband, and my mom had asked me to drop it off since she had a doctor's appointment. And the GPS took me down some back road I didn't recognize. And then I saw the sign for the funeral home and thought it was the street name, not an actual business. By the time I realized my mistake, I was already parked. And then a woman in a black dress opened the side door of the building and waved at me like she'd been expecting me for 20 minutes. I should have corrected her. I know that. I should have said, "I'm sorry, I think there's been some confusion," gotten back in my Civic, and driven to Mrs. Holloway's. But the woman looked so relieved to see me, and she was already talking. Something about how the family had specifically requested a viewing before the service, and there wasn't much time. And before I fully processed what was happening, I was inside. The room was long and dim lit, mostly by those candles I'd smelled from outside. There were maybe 30 people standing in quiet clusters near the walls, speaking in the low, careful voices people use when they're not sure how grief is supposed to sound. Men in dark suits. Women in structured black dresses with pearl earrings that probably cost more than my car. The flowers were everywhere, white, mostly, with deep green foliage, and in the center of the room, on a raised platform draped in cream-colored velvet, was the casket. It was black, lacquered. The kind of casket that doesn't have a price tag because if you're asking, you're not supposed to be in this room. The woman who'd let me in, I later learned she was the funeral director's assistant, pressed a clipboard into my hands and whispered something about the guest register. I took the clipboard. I don't know why I took it. Some reflex, maybe, from years of being handed things in hospitals. You take the clipboard. You hold it like it means something. I drifted toward the front of the room the way you drift in these situations, slowly and without real intention, because that's what everyone else was doing. I kept my eyes down. I read the floral arrangement cards. With deepest sympathy from the Castriani family, with love from the Delancey group. The Delancey group. I knew that name. Everyone in the city knew that name. It was on 3 buildings downtown, on the stadium naming rights deal that had made the news 2 years ago, on the lips of every local news anchor whenever something large and expensive changed hands in this city. The Delancey group was real estate, construction, private equity, legitimate on paper, and according to every rumor that had ever circulated through the break room at Mercy General, something considerably less legitimate underneath. I looked up at the casket. The man inside was in his mid-40s, dark hair, silvering at the temples, a jaw like something carved rather than grown. Even at rest, in a charcoal suit with a white pocket square folded with geometric precision. He looked like someone who had spent his entire life being the most dangerous person in whatever room he occupied. I don't know what made me step closer. Professional reflex, maybe. Or maybe it was the antiseptic smell, which had gotten stronger near the front of the room, and which my brain had started filing under this is wrong. I was 3 feet away when I saw his chest move. Not a lot. Not a gasp or a heave. Just a slow, shallow rise. The kind of breath a person takes when they're very deeply sedated, when their body is doing the minimum required to stay alive and not a single thing more. I stopped. My nursing brain ran the checklist in about 4 seconds flat. Color, too warm for post-mortem lividity. Lips, not the blue-gray of oxygen deprivation in the recently dead. The faint shadows under his eyes looked like exhaustion, not the fixed, settled stillness of death. And there, if I held completely still and blocked out every whispered condolence in the room, the faintest pulse visible in his neck. He wasn't dead. This man, whoever he was, lying in a $100,000 casket in front of 30 people who had come to mourn him, was not dead. I did not scream. I am proud of that, even now. What I did was take one step back, look down at the clipboard I was still holding, and take 3 very controlled breaths. Then I looked around the room. 30 people, dark suits, expensive jewelry. The kind of stillness that isn't really stillness at all, but something held very deliberately in place. I thought about walking out. I thought about it seriously, and in detail, the way you think about an emergency exit when you're still calm enough to use it. I could hand the clipboard to someone, murmur an apology, and be in my Civic in under 2 minutes. But I was a trauma nurse, and there was a living man in a casket. I turned to the woman standing closest to me. 50s, silver-streaked hair pulled back, the kind of posture that came from decades of being looked at, and I said quietly, "I need to speak with whoever is in charge of the arrangements." She looked at me for a long moment. Her expression didn't change exactly, but something behind her eyes did. "And why is that?" "Because I'm a nurse," I said. "And I have reason to believe that the person in that casket requires immediate medical attention." The silence that followed was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. His name, I learned later, was Callum Voss. Not the Callum Voss on the death certificate, that turned out to be a piece of paper that had cost someone a great deal of money to produce, but Callum Voss, the man, who woke up 40 minutes later in a private room on the 2nd floor of the funeral home, while I was checking his pupils with the penlight I always kept in my coat pocket, out of habit. Because old habits are the last things that leave you. The man who'd been standing next to the silver-haired woman. Broad-shouldered, maybe 35, with the careful stillness of someone trained to occupy as little space as possible, until he needed to occupy all of it. Had made a single phone call after I spoke, and then everything had moved very quickly. I'd been guided upstairs. The viewing room had been quietly cleared. A medical bag had appeared that suggested someone in the Delancey group kept a physician on call for situations that could not be documented in any hospital system. I wasn't afraid. I've thought about that a lot since. I should have been afraid. But I was in clinical mode. The place my brain went during traumas at Mercy General, when the situation required everything I had, and there was no room left over for feelings. And in clinical mode, fear is just noise. His breathing is shallow but improving, I told the broad-shouldered man, who had introduced himself only as Rourke. Whatever he was given, his body is metabolizing it. His color's coming back. Pupils are reactive, which is good. He's going to have a significant headache when he fully wakes up. Rourke was watching me with the expression of a man trying to decide something. "You're not going to ask." "I'm going to ask a lot of things," I said, "but not right now." He almost smiled. Almost. When Callum Voss opened his eyes 20 minutes later, the first thing he did was look at me. Not at Rourke, who was standing 6 feet away with his arms crossed. Not at the room, or the ceiling, or the window. At me, like he'd already known I was there and was checking to confirm it. His eyes were gray. Not blue-gray or silver-gray, but the flat, particular gray of winter sky before it snows. "You're not the doctor," he said. His voice was rougher than I'd expected, but steady. "No," I said. "I'm a nurse. How's your head?" A pause. Like someone drove a spike through the back of it. That'll be the drug wearing off. "Don't try to sit up yet." He didn't try to sit up. He kept watching me instead, with that flat gray gaze, and I got the impression that being told what to do was not something that happened to him regularly, and that he was deciding, in real time, whether he was going to allow it. He allowed it. "Who are you?" he asked. "Someone who made a wrong turn," I said, and then didn't leave when I should have. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite warmth, more like recognition, the look of a person who has spent their life reading rooms and had just accurately read this one. "Rourke," he said, without looking away from me. "Sir, find out who she is, and then make sure she has whatever she needs." I should have said something then. I don't want anything. I just want to go home. Something clean and simple and final. But I looked at the man lying on that narrow daybed in the dim room above the funeral home, and I thought about the chest that had barely moved, and the pulse in his neck, and the fact that in another 20 minutes, without me, he might have been lowered into the ground still breathing. I didn't say anything clean and simple. I said, "You need fluids and monitoring for the next 6 hours. After that, your body should handle the rest. But you should know. Whoever gave you that dose knew exactly what they were doing. It wasn't meant to knock you out. It was meant to stop your heart." The room went very quiet. "They nearly managed it," I added. Callum Voss looked at me for a long time. "Yes," he said, "they did. I didn't leave that night. I told myself it was clinical obligation. You don't walk away from a patient whose toxicology you don't have, whose cardiac history you don't know, who was nearly killed with something precise enough to slow his heart to the edge of flatline." That was true. But it wasn't the whole truth, and I've been honest enough with myself in the years since to admit that. Part of me stayed because something about Callum Voss made me want to understand him, not fix him. I want to be precise about that, because there's a difference that matters. Excuse me, I've known women who fell for men like him and spent years trying to sand down the parts they couldn't accept, trying to make something safer and softer out of someone who was never going to be either of those things. I had no interest in that project, but understanding, that was something else. He told me some of it himself, over the 6 hours I sat in that room and checked his vitals every 40 minutes and refused the dinner that Rourke brought up from somewhere that smelled like it cost more than my rent. Not everything, he wasn't a confessional man, but he told me enough. The Delancey Group was his, had been for 12 years since he'd taken it over from his father at 32. The legitimate side, real estate, construction, the stadium deal, was real. The other side was also real. He said it simply, without apology, and I appreciated that more than I would have appreciated a lie. He told me that someone within his own organization had arranged the poisoning, that the fake death had been planned weeks in advance, that 3 people knew about it, and that one of those 3 people had added something to the compound his doctor had prepared. Something that had taken the mild cardiac suppressant meant to simulate death and turned it into something considerably closer to the real thing. "You have 3 people you trust," I said, "and one of them tried to kill you." "Yes." "And you don't know which one?" "Not yet." I checked his blood pressure. It was coming back to something approaching normal. "What do you do when you find out?" He looked at me steadily. "What do you think I do?" I thought about it. I set down the cuff. "I think you've already made peace with what you do. I think you made peace with it a long time ago, and you're not looking for someone to tell you it's wrong." A pause. "Most people try. I'm not most people." That almost smile again, and then, quieter. "No, you're not." His name was kept out of everything. I don't know exactly how that worked. I have some guesses, and they involve lawyers who bill in increments that would make me dizzy. But within 48 hours, Callum Voss was officially mourned, officially buried, and officially gone. The death certificate stood. The estate moved through whatever channels had been prepared for it. And Callum himself was somewhere that wasn't this city, recovering. I went back to Mercy General on Thursday morning. I worked a 12-hour shift. I ate a granola bar at midnight in the break room and listened to my colleague Petra complain about the new scheduling software, and I thought, this is my life. This is the shape of it. And I had always been fine with that shape. Rourke came to find me on Sunday. He was waiting in the parking garage when I got off my shift, leaning against a car that cost more than I would earn in 3 years of nursing, and he handed me an envelope without preamble. "He wanted you to have this," he said. I looked at the envelope. I did not open it. "Tell him he doesn't owe me anything." "He knows that." Rourke paused. "That's not why he sent it." I took the envelope home. I set it on my kitchen table and made coffee and stood at the window for a while, looking at the parking lot of my apartment complex, at the sodium vapor lights coming on in the early dark. Then I opened it. There was no money inside, which surprised me. There was a card with a phone number written on it in handwriting that was precise and slightly cramped, like someone who learned to write in a language that moved differently than English. And below the number, one line, "You told me what I needed to hear. If you ever need the same, call." I put the card in the kitchen drawer where I keep things I don't know what to do with. Takeout menus, expired coupons, a spare key to an apartment I'd moved out of 2 years ago. I didn't call. Not for 4 months. The night I finally called, I was sitting in the parking lot of Mercy General at 11:15. still in my scrubs, because I had just been informed that the hospital was cutting a third of the night nursing staff for budget reasons, and my position was among them. 4 years. 4 years of 12-hour shifts and codes, and the particular grief of losing someone you'd fought for all night. And a 30-minute meeting with HR had reduced it to a folder with my name on it, and a 2-week severance package, and a handshake from a woman who kept looking at her phone. I sat in my car for a long time. Then I took out the card. He answered on the second ring, which somehow surprised me more than anything else that had happened in the past 4 months. "I didn't think you'd call," he said. He didn't sound displeased. "I didn't think I would either," I said. "I just lost my job." A pause. "Tell me." So I did. I sat in that parking lot and told him about the meeting and the folder and the handshake, and he listened without interrupting, which was something almost no one in my life did reliably. When I finished, there was a brief silence. "Come to dinner," he said. "Callum, not tonight, Friday, wherever you want." I looked out the windshield at the hospital I'd just been cut from. "A diner," I said. "I want to go to a diner, the kind with counterstools and pie under a glass dome." Another pause, longer this time, and then, "All right." The diner was on Fletcher Avenue, which I picked because I'd driven past it 100 times and always meant to stop. We sat at the counter, which I had specifically requested, because something about the counter felt equal in a way that a booth might not. No one has a power position at a counter. You're just two people sitting next to each other in a line. He came alone, which I hadn't expected. No Rourke. No car idling at the curb with someone inside who had an earpiece. Just Callum Voss in a dark sweater and jeans that probably still cost more than my groceries, but that at least weren't a suit. And he sat on the stool next to mine and ordered coffee and cherry pie without looking at the menu. We talked for 3 hours. Not about what he did. Not about the Delancey group or the man or woman who had tried to kill him, whose name I still didn't know and didn't ask for. We talked about the things people talk about when they're trying to understand each other. Where we'd grown up. What we'd wanted to be before life handed us something else. The specific texture of the years that had shaped us. He'd grown up in Pittsburgh. His mother had been a school teacher. He'd watched his father build something from nothing, and then make choices that could never fully be undone, and when the time came, he'd stepped into the thing his father had built, because he knew it better than he knew anything else, and because some part of him had always understood that he was made for sharp edges. "You don't regret it," I said. "Not the way you mean." "What way do I mean?" He turned to look at me directly. The diner light was warm and a little yellow, and it did something to the gray of his eyes that made them seem almost human, in a way I wasn't sure they'd been before. "You mean the kind of regret that changes you, that makes you want to be something different. And you don't have that." "No," he said. "Do you want me to?" I thought about it honestly. "No," I said. "I think if you did, you'd be someone I'd already understand, and I'm more interested in people I don't." He was quiet for a moment. 4 months, he said. "I thought about calling you. Why didn't you?" "Because you hadn't called me." He said it simply, without drama. "You're not someone who should be pushed." I looked down at my coffee cup. Nobody had ever said anything like that to me before. Not in that exact way. Not as an observation, rather than a complaint. Every man I'd dated had at some point gotten frustrated with my self-sufficiency, with the way I solved my own problems and made my own decisions and sometimes forgot to leave room for someone else to be needed. It had always been framed as a flaw. A thing to work on. Callum said it like it was just a fact, like it was simply the shape of me. "Thank you," I said. He didn't ask for what. He just nodded. It was Rourke who figured it out. He told Callum 3 weeks after our dinner. I know this because Callum told me later, quietly, without making it into something larger than it was. The third person. The one who had known about the plan and had altered the compound and had stood in the viewing room that Tuesday afternoon with the rest of the mourners, wearing appropriate grief like a coat borrowed for the occasion. The name surprised Callum, he said. Only a little. He didn't tell me what happened after that. I didn't ask. I've thought about whether that makes me complicit in something, and I've made my peace with the thinking and the not asking in the same way you make peace with most things you can't undo, carefully and without lying to yourself about what it cost, What he did tell me was that it was over, and that he was coming back to the city. He asked if he could take me to dinner again. Counterstools, I said. Counterstools, he agreed. I won't pretend the next year was simple. Nothing about loving someone like Callum Voss is simple. And I want to be honest about that, because I think women deserve honesty about the specific complications of choosing a person who exists in the world the way he does. There were nights I couldn't reach him and didn't know why. There were things I learned gradually and things I was deliberately not told, and I had to decide for myself where my lines were and hold them without asking him to move his. He never asked me to look away from what he was. I never asked him to become something he wasn't. And in the space between those two things, something grew that I hadn't been expecting and couldn't have planned for. I found a new nursing position in February at a smaller hospital across town, with a night shift that suited me and a cardiac unit that needed experienced people. Callum had offered to make calls on my behalf, and I had told him firmly, and only once, that if he did, I would not speak to him for a month. He hadn't made the calls. He had, however, appeared at my apartment 2 days later with a paper bag from the Italian place on Meridian that I'd mentioned exactly once in passing, which I decided was acceptable. I think about that first day sometimes. The wrong turn. The woman in the black dress waving like she expected me. The room full of expensive grief and eucalyptus and that chemical smell underneath everything, pulling at some trained part of my brain. I think about the moment I saw his chest move. Some people would say the universe put me in that parking lot, turned my GPS down the wrong road, arranged the whole improbable afternoon so that one specific person would not be lowered into the ground, still breathing. I'm a nurse. I believe in physiology and probability and the stubbornness of the human body more than I believe in fate. But I also believe in paying attention, in following the thing that feels wrong even when everything around you is moving forward like it's fine, in not walking away from what you know how to do just because the situation doesn't fit the context you expected. I stayed in that room above the funeral home because I was trained to, and because a man who wasn't dead needed someone to know that. I called that number 4 months later because I was sitting in a parking lot with a severance folder and no plan. And some part of me trusted a person I barely knew more than I trusted anything else available to me in that moment. Callum Voss is not easy. He would tell you that himself, and he'd say it without apology, which is exactly the kind of honesty that makes him worth the complication. And I am not someone who needs saving or softening or managing. It turns out that's exactly what he needed too.